I would like to say welcome to today's Research Pays Off. I am going to hand it over to our speaker, Rory Charlesworth of Highway Data Systems in the UK.
Thanks very much, Lauren. Can you see the presentation still?
Yes,
okay,
we can.
Great, yep. I'll crack on then. Good morning, everybody, from a very hot UK. We've actually recorded our hottest ever temperature today. It's 105 Fahrenheit, so we're pretty hot over here. Thanks very much to the NRRA for inviting me to talk, and thank you all for your time. What I'm going to talk to you about this morning is research that Highway Data Systems has been involved in over the last 4 or 5 years, which has led to the point now where we're operating around 20 or so paving gangs in the UK without the requirement for materials technicians. So we'll be looking at how that research has worked, some of the lessons we've learned from it, and how the technology functions in order to be able to provide that service. First off, just a little bit about Highway Data Systems. We are a fully accredited materials testing laboratory, but we are the only testing laboratory that I'm aware of in the world that uses exclusively automated and digital technology to conduct road quality assurance testing. We don't have any materials technicians working for us, but we provide the same service to contractors as a conventional test house would do. We actually manufacture our own hardware, which is retrofitted to pavers and rollers, and our own software systems, which work as e-ticketing systems as well. We operate that as a service for contractors, and we make our data available for departments of transport and national regulators. We are the leading company, I think, within the UK, conducting research into the automation for road construction quality assurance. So I hope what I have to say proves to be of interest. These are the 5 research papers that I'm going to be drawing on this morning. The majority of them have been conducted looking at trying to take advantage of new technology that's come onto the market, particularly for paver monitoring, roller monitoring, and e-ticketing. The work carried out by TRL, the Transport Research Laboratory, potentially doesn't have quite so much relevance to the US, because it was looking at using laser-based methods for measuring surface macro texture, which I know that you don't do in the US, but they did also look at monitoring using lasers as well for longitudinal surface regularity. The most recent research we've been part of, which was actually led by Transport Infrastructure Ireland, took into account all aspects of the quality assurance process and really has advanced compaction monitoring. So I'll be focusing on that probably during the middle part of the presentation. But as you can see, we've been working with international engineering consultants such as WSP, Jacobs, AECOM, as well as national regulators such as Highways England and TII. Okay, so the reason why the UK and Ireland have been looking at moving away from the use of materials technicians falls into 4 categories. The first is the cost of putting people out onto site. It is becoming increasingly expensive to do so. And there is a shortage of workers within the industry that I'll get on to talking about in just a sec. But I think probably the main reason why we believe, and people in the UK and Ireland believe, that it is a good idea to remove materials technicians from conducting quality assurance on site is because of the health and safety risk that they are put under. There are many new ways to do the same testing which don't require putting people at risk, and obviously if we can move towards a situation in which where construction sites are less risky for the people on them, then that will obviously be to everybody's benefit. Another issue is the shortage of people who are trained and capable to conduct materials testing within the UK industry. From my conversations with colleagues in America as well, I understand that there are some similar problems. The general rate of road maintenance and construction is going up, but there aren't necessarily the same amount of people increasing in parallel to be able to deal with that increased strain that's being put on the industry. And so that's creating a shortage of people, which is a motivation for trying to find alternative methods so that we can improve the productivity of construction, which I think, as we all know, is fairly lacking in comparison to some other global industries. Another thing which we in particular at Highway Data Systems have been very keen to push is, at the moment, all the data that's captured during road construction from the quality assurance point of view is not really used in asset management. It stands to reason, as far as we're concerned, that if you know things that happen during the road construction process, for example, levels of compaction, thermal segregation, rolling temperatures and the like, it should inform your understanding of how that asset is going to perform over its life cycle. But if we want to take advantage of that data, which is available, then we need to have a method of collection, which means that it's going to be able to be incorporated into pavement management systems and other asset management systems. So part of the work that we're doing at the moment with the likes of Highways England and Transport Scotland is taking this data, recording it in a geospatial format so that it can be included in things like deterioration modelling, as well as more conventional asset management approaches. I think so. The point I'm trying to make is, if you have somebody out with a clipboard writing down temperatures, based off chainage references, it's going to be very difficult to utilize that information in a big data analysis environment. So if we want to take advantage of the asset management opportunities that there are from collecting quality assurance data, we have to be able to improve our method of data collection. The final issue really revolves around the actual quality of testing via conventional methods. We think that there are opportunities for improvement through using modern technology to improve the quality of testing. I would also probably include in that the volume of testing. A lot of the testing that's currently carried out with technicians is spot testing necessarily. But if you have automated systems that are able to continuously monitor roads as they're being built, then obviously the volume of test data that you'll get will be much higher, and therefore the reliability of that reporting should be increased. So those four areas really were identified as reasons why we might want to move away from using materials technicians, and they really informed the research methodology that was carried out in the research that I've already alluded to. So this is to take a little bit of a closer look at some of the issues that are associated with materials technician testing. This is obviously, from first glance, not a particularly safe environment to be conducting testing. I think really the materials technician is the only person on site who would be asked to put their hand into a moving vehicle with very hot material coming out of the back of another moving vehicle. It's self-evidently not particularly safe to be doing so. But we also think that testing in this way puts quite a strain on the ability of the technician to do all the other tests, because, as we know, the technician here will take a reading using a temperature probe, and will then have to run back to where the rollers are and take a rolling temperature, and then come up to the cab of the truck in order to sign a ticket and to copy all the information down to build a lane record. That's quite a lot to be doing in the space of what can only be a couple of minutes, depending on the speed of the paver. And it's unlikely that the technician will be able to do, I would say, a thorough job of taking the delivery temperatures. Another issue with testing like this, material is always cooler at the back of a truck, as we know, and testing as the material has just been tipped into the hopper will therefore be more likely to give you an unrepresentative delivery temperature. So for a few different reasons, including quality, productivity, but most important, like to get away from, and we, during the process of the research, identified some methods of doing so using technology. The second area of testing that we think is problematic is density testing, whether it's via non-nuclear or nuclear density gauges. Again, the health and safety issue is evident. Crouching near site traffic, often in between moving rollers, is potentially hazardous, and if we can avoid people being put into those situations, then it would be quite obviously for the better. And I can say that, having been a materials technician myself, you do end up in some often sketchy situations with roller drivers who aren't looking where they're going. But there are also some quality issues with testing like this. Typically speaking, this testing is done after the material has been laid and cooled. which means that if you end up with problems with your compaction, then there's not really much you can do about it because the compaction process has been completed and the material is cooled to a point where it's no longer compactable. Thirdly, the area that's being tested using this system is pretty limited. I think the diameter of a typical non-nuclear density gauge is about 300 mil. And if you're measuring that in 20-meter offsets and alternate wheel tracks, then you're not really getting a huge amount of information about the compaction quality of the road that's under construction. So the health and safety issue again here just highlighted by some squashed density gauges. But I think the main issue from the quality point of view is not being able to provide real-time data to the roller drivers. Testing after it's gone cold is obviously not as good as being able to test it during the compaction process. And the data again being non-GPS based, it's often done off chainages, meaning that it's limited in its application after the event in asset management. So there are issues with data collection, the data reliability, the health and safety. And one actual factor that I should have mentioned is the reliability of the testing via a density gauge. From day to day, even though your mix design might not officially change, the varying levels of recycled asphalt products mean that the correlations that have been established at the beginning of the job may well be skewed quite quickly. But I think within the industry, too much faith is put in the ability of density gauges to give reliable reporting. So there's lots of reasons why we might want to move away from that. And during the course of the research, again, we've demonstrated that it is possible to use instrumentation in order to give a more reliable, safer and higher quality compaction report. Again, I mentioned the rolling, not the rolling straight edge, I mentioned surface macrotexture testing. This is something which is again, a bit of a problem on the UK network, not something you do in the US. So I'll focus more on the rolling straight edge, which I believe is carried out in the US. Both of these methods are done by single people, typically speaking, up to a kilometre away from where the rest of the gang are on site. So lone working, potentially in not very well guarded working areas with limited traffic management, using very outdated technology and generally putting themselves at risk. So these are all reasons why we think, and the regulating authorities in the UK, as well as the engineering consultants we work with, thought it would be better if we could try and find some different methods for conducting this testing without the use of materials technicians. So this is the technology that we used during the course of the research in order to replicate what a materials technician does on site, as well as to improve on what they do. So the first system I'd like to show you is called eLoad. eLoad is a web application that acts as an e-ticketing system and a materials delivery management system. As you can see, it sits on the side of a paver on a magnetically mounted RAM mount and runs off a rugged tablet. What you can see on the system here is the vehicle registration, the yellow box on the left. Along the top, you have the material code, the time that the material was loaded onto the truck, the tonnage of the material, and we're able to provide an estimated time of arrival to site for the gang. The way that we do this, we take the location of the site relative to the location of the batching plant. We have a little app that runs in the background, takes into account traffic conditions. And on the right, you can see that we can also provide map-based tracking as well. The way that this system works essentially is by taking a digital copy of a paper ticket as soon as it's printed at the weighbridge. We get sent that information and we send it to the side of the tablet. The way that it works for building a laying record is as soon as the load of material is tipped into the hopper, the banksman presses the vehicle registration button. That drops a GPS point around which all of the other ticket information is attached, and we can therefore track the dispatch location of the material onto site. It's a lot better than having somebody copying things down to a clipboard, obviously, because it's an automated system. It uses GPS referencing, meaning that it's more reliable than using a chainage-based system. But I think perhaps more importantly to the road construction quality, is the ability to track the material as well as to provide an estimated time of arrival. One of the things that was identified during the research process was that going to have more up-to-date information about when material is going to reach their site will obviously be able to vary the speed of the paver, and therefore they should be able to reduce thermal segregation by keeping a more consistent paving speed. And that obviously has strong implications for ride quality as well as compaction, compactability. Obviously reducing the occurrence of cold spots is going to lead to a better compacted road and a less thermally segregated one. So that basically takes care of the construction of lane records, with the exception of material delivery temperatures. And in order to capture that information, we have a system which we have made in-house. We've called it eTech. eTech is magnetically mounted to the side of a paver. It consists of a GPS system, a data logger, and 2 infrared temperature sensors. We've experimented with a number of different positions for the infrared temperature sensors. We used to actually have a sensor which pointed at, but we found that was actually a pretty unsustainable place to have the infrared temperature sensor just because it got so dirty. So after a bit of experimentation, we found that probably the best area to have your infrared temperature sensors is actually pointing at the 2 augers. So we again have these magnetically mounted so they can fit onto any different type of paver. And these continuously monitor the material temperature. The reason why we have them pointing at the augers is because by the time the material has been through the flight and mixed by the augers, you find that you generally have a more representative temperature. This compared to taking the temperature of the material as it's just come out the back of the truck and sitting in the hopper, is preferable because obviously you're not taking the material temperature from the coldest part of the load. It also happens that infrared temperature sensors work better with moving material. So if we are going to move to a more automated system, infrared temperature sensors are likely to be the tools in usage, and having them pointing at material which has been mixed at the time gives you a more reliable reading. So the other part of the paver instrumentation we have is the E-Load material delivery management system that can fit onto the paver anywhere that's required. We also built a paver out temperature system called Visor. This sits on the top of the canopy of the paver and it measures the temperature of the material as it moves out from the back of the screed. And this is the system which monitors thermal segregation. So as a combined suite of systems, the E-Load system for e-ticketing, the eTech paver monitoring system for delivery temperatures and paver movements, as well as the Visor paver mounted thermal profiler, give you a complete understanding of paver operations without the need for anybody interacting with the paver. They run continuously and automatically. And one point I just mentioned about the magnetic mounting is we found that plant does tend to break down, unfortunately. So having a magnetically mounted system is quite important if you're relying on this system without having a technician on site. If you need to move over to a new paver, then having something that's magnetically mounted obviously enables you to move it over quite quickly, whereas some comparative systems on the market are hardwired in and they reduce the flexibility of operation. For monitoring roller operations, we again have a system that is retrofittable to any roller. It consists of a computer system which monitors the temperature of the material being rolled via an infrared temperature sensor. That sits underneath the cab and continuously monitors the temperature of the material as it's being compacted. We have a highly accurate GPS system which is able to monitor the number of passes each square meter of the road has been exposed to by the compacting roller. We have a visual display which sends all of the information or makes it available to the roller driver so that they can see the compaction effort that they are exerting on the road, and also the temperature of the material underneath the roller. We can fit an accelerometer, and I know that particularly in the US there is perhaps greater usage of stiffness as an indicator of compaction. We tend not to do that because we think that it doesn't account for temperature properly. it stands to reason that you can have a cold material and still be full of air voids, even though it would be a stiff material. So we try and avoid that, but if we have clients who require a stiffness reading, then we can obviously do that as well. 4G modem just for sending all the information to our server in real time. And I'll talk about how this works as a compaction monitoring system in just a moment. But firstly, this is a look at how data is represented coming from the visor system. What you can see along the bottom of this temperature readout is a distance measurement. What you can see on the right hand side is a color coordinated temperature reading. That's in degrees Celsius. What you can see along the movement of the paver are these purple vertical lines. These correspond to paver stops. So what happens is as the paver moves from left to right, it stops and the material underneath the screed cools, typically whilst waiting for a new load of material. And what you end up with is this quite segregated material by temperature. So unfortunately, on this kind of a road, what you're going to find is these purple areas are likely to be less compactable, because by the time the roller gets to them, the temperature will have cooled and they won't be in an ideal temperature compaction window. So that leads to worse compactability, and it probably leads to a poorer ride quality as well. And it has implications, obviously, for the viability of the road during its life cycle. And one thing I should have mentioned is that all of this data has to necessarily be available in real time to anybody on site. One of the things that the research lead participants were very keen on is obviously that there wasn't a loss of feedback provided to site operatives by not having a materials technician there. So it was important for us to come up with a way to be able to make sure that site operatives still had the ability to make decisions based on what was happening on the site. So what we're doing at the moment is generally using QR codes. And you should be able to scan that QR code that's on the top right hand corner of your screen to show, I believe, a system that's operating in Glasgow in Scotland. I'm just going to try this now to make sure it's working. If you scan that QR code, you'll be taken to a screen which will show the thermal segregation as measured by a visor system. There's a button at the top of the screen which says show location on map, and that will show you the location just on the M8, which is a major motorway in Scotland. So this is an easy way for us to make sure that people on site can get access to the data that they need. We have a system, a QR code system for eTech as well, and obviously the ELOAD data is shown on the tablet screen as well. The idea behind this that we got from the research, particularly for research conducted in Scotland, is that we're going to try and adopt some of the American methods of running contracts by either penalising or providing incentives to contractors to basically reduce their thermal segregation, particularly in Scotland, which is pretty cold. It's very important to try and make sure that you have a nice unified non-segmented road. This is a look at how the roller system looks at inside a cab. What you can see on the left here is a color coordinated screen showing the number of passes that each square meter has been exposed to on the mat. And on the left, you can see a data readout from the same system showing the level of compaction that's been achieved across the site. The way that we use these systems for actually assessing compaction performance is by using a method compaction approach. We're working at the moment with Transport Scotland and engineering consultants WSP to develop this compaction specification, and I was very much hoping that by today I would actually be able to show you the fully formed specification, but I don't actually have that. What I have got is details of how it's going to look without the actual pen on paper, I'm afraid. So the way that we use this is through doing a laboratory correlation. We go out with a pavement density meter and using that, we assess the increasing compaction of the material relative to the increasing number of passes each square meter is exposed to. We take cores out to prove the final density and to do the correlations, and we then assign each number of passes a color, plug it back into the roller system, and ask the roller driver to go and roll the area until they've achieved sufficient number of passes to guarantee compaction. So this curve is a predicted curve, what we would expect to see. And this is some data actually taken from the Transport Infrastructure Ireland work that we did earlier on this year. So as you can see, it follows a fairly predictable curve, achieving the minimum percentage air voids, which is 7% in the UK, after only after guaranteed after 5 passes and pretty much after 4 passes. The same result was shown for a base course material, and we're building up a bank of these materials. We've done about 20 so far across England, Scotland and Ireland, and that's being used by WSP to come up with a specification based on this method compaction approach. Now, the one variable that is not being accounted for in this is obviously temperature, and that's the reason why the specification has actually been delayed in its publication, because of an attempt to account for the temperature. And I think the best way to demonstrate how temperature is going to be accounted for in the upcoming specification is probably by showing a quick process diagram. So as the material comes out of the batching plant, we get the data sent through to ELOAD, and we track the material delivery on its way to site. Through ETEC, we capture the delivery temperature information, and we also track using GPS the movement of the paver. The visor system captures the temperature of the material as it moves out from behind the screed up to a distance of up to 3 meters behind the back of the screed. And it's from this temperature measurement that the specification is actually going to take account for temperature during the compaction window. So what's likely to be applied is going to be a time window in which all necessary compacting passes have to be achieved. And I apologise that I've got soil rollers on here, but it's quite difficult to find appropriate icons, so I hope you'll forgive me for that. So yeah, as I was saying, the compaction window is going to be measured by time relative to the initial temperature as achieved by measurement of the temperature of the material coming out from the back of the screed. So whatever the number of passes is required will be communicated to the roller drivers. They will have a temperature map in front of them, and by combining the data through the HDS database, we'll be able to determine whether a roller has achieved necessary amount of compaction within the time window allotted. All the data is again sent through to the HDS database, and we report it as you would from a materials technician in any number of different formats. We've also developed, in response to the requirement to move away from testing with the traditional surface macrotexture and surface regularity systems, 2 laser systems, which are both vehicle mounted. As I mentioned, volumetric patch method has been replaced with a macrotexture laser, and we have a very simple single point laser which measures over a 3 meter period deviations from a flat surface in the same way as a rolling straight edge does. The advantage of using these systems relative to removing technicians is obviously you don't have somebody out operating on their own at, say, 3 o'clock in the morning with nobody else around them on site. All of the data is captured at traffic speed, meaning if any data is missed, then there's no need to put traffic management systems out, which obviously reduces the cost. All of the data is GPS stamped and it's time stamped, meaning that it can be easily included into pavement management systems for asset management purposes, and it's a lot cheaper in doing so as well. We have other systems that we do, including measurements of International Roughness Index, other measurements of texture and grip testing. But the main focus really has been, for the purposes of this research, the laser straight edge, as well as the surface macrotexture laser. So the outcome from the research that we did, particularly with Jacobs and WSP, has led to, as far as I understand it, the first set of specifications which fully account for all aspects of compaction, of the laying process. Transport Scotland brought out the requirement for using a materials delivery management system, and that includes e-ticketing, as well as full tracking of the material to site, including the estimated time of arrival and the creation of digital laying records, full paver monitoring, including the paver out temperature monitoring, which is not actually used elsewhere in the UK, and obviously compaction monitoring, not with a soils roller, but with an asphalt roller. And these are the first of the type that I'm aware of. We're operating currently 6 gangs across the south of Scotland, and by the end of this year, we'll have a further 12 gangs operating exclusively without the use of materials technicians on the Transport Scotland network. And it's through the research processes that I've been talking about that we've been able to achieve that. Transport Infrastructure Ireland and National Highways, which is actually the English Department of Transport, are following on from the Transport Scotland specifications as part of a process called the UK Road Liaison Group. But they're waiting for the final specification to come out from the work that we're doing currently with WSP and Transport Scotland on compaction before following in suit. And we're hoping probably by the end of next year that we should be within the UK, at least on the national network, operating without the requirement for putting any materials technicians out in danger. So that's how the research has worked in terms of leading up to the development of specifications, and how we've developed in partnership with our research partners the technology and the framework for using the system to provide quality assurance data. But there are some other practical uses for intelligent construction technology for both departments of transport and for contractors. Essentially, we like to see ourselves as being able to bridge the gap between contractors and road authorities. I think it's fair to say that some contractors do not have the expertise or the resources or the experience to operate intelligent construction technology. And there's a little bit of tension perhaps between DOTs, certainly in the UK, and their expectations of what technology can do and the opportunities that are afforded by technology, and the tension between that and the contractors with their less advanced perhaps understanding of technology, or certainly their limited opportunity to deploy resource in order to capture data in the way that departments of transport might like. So we try and bridge the gap as a materials testing house, helping to provide the technology that will deliver to the departments of transport the data in the way that they want, but also help take the responsibility for maintenance and operation for the contractors. Operating this technology, I think in an American context, perhaps might not be taken straight away for compliance. I was at the Minnesota Transportation Conference earlier this year, and some of the conversation certainly was around perhaps freeing up technicians to do other work, potentially more specialised jobs, certainly taking samples. But we do hope that we'll be able to enable contractors to worry less about materials testing, and certainly the specifications that are derived for using intelligent construction technology, and focus on the main task of building roads. So operating our technology as a service helps contractors by reducing the capex, so they don't actually have to buy any equipment. We retain the maintenance and operation responsibility for the hardware, as well as the delivery of the software. As I mentioned earlier on, it is considerably cheaper actually using technology to conduct road quality assurance testing than using technicians. In the UK context, it's over 25% cheaper. I think it remains to be seen how much cheaper it's going to be in the US, although I understand it's not a cheap business employing people in the US, so potentially it could be even more favourable. There's certainly opportunities for DOTs insofar as the technology we've developed helps to build better and longer lasting roads. I think in particular the real-time compaction systems, which enable roller drivers to correct errors before the material gets too cold, is particularly advantageous. The E-load system, which helps to regulate the paving speed and reducing thermal segregation, both of those taken in tandem certainly should be technologies that will help to ensure a better constructed road, and therefore a longer lasting road, saving money and obviously reducing operational requirements. There are some significant opportunities to use quality assurance data and asset management. I think those opportunities are yet to be realised because the data really needs to get into pavement management systems for a reasonable period of time before that big data analysis is going to be able to be performed. But if we don't start capturing it now, then we're not going to be able to take advantage of that in a few years' time. The first thing we really have to do as an industry is make sure that we're capturing the data in a way that's going to be useful to us a little bit further down the line. But the opportunities are certainly there, and we'd certainly like to see them realised. And finally, it's probably the thing I've mentioned the most during this presentation, but there are some significant risks to materials technicians being out on construction sites. And if we can use technology to reduce those risks, then obviously it's going to be to everybody's advantage within the industry. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I didn't rip through that too quickly. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Yes, great information. I do have a question from Iab that was during the presentation, and I can read it, and maybe you already answered this through the rest of your information after that. He says, can these technologies go beyond reporting and documenting the product quality and the construction process? For example, is there work done to use the e-ticketing, vehicle speed, delivery temp, etc., the actual temperature of the loose material in the paver and the temperature underneath the roller to recommend optimal paving strategies, speed, vibration, etc.?
There is work going on, and that is tying into the broader automation question. So trying to automate the actual movement of pavers and rollers. We don't tend to actually get involved with that too much because a lot of that is to do with the actual plant operation. And because we're trying to really just replicate what materials technicians do and provide a quality assurance service, then that's kind of going a step beyond. But it's certainly something that we'd like to do. But I think we kind of have to get this bit solved first before we potentially look at using the systems for something more, in a more advanced way. But I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody who's interested in doing that, because it stands to reason that if we're capturing this kind of data, then it should be possible to improve the way that the road is being constructed. Definitely.
Can I just add one question to that follow-up?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for the excellent presentation and also for your response on this. In the slides, you showed a very nice plot with air voids and number of passes, roller number of passes. That is related to the question that I was asking, actually. That's a very powerful plot. Is there a way to also include in that plot or adjust that model based on the temperature, the temperature in the paver or in the roller or etiquetting? Once you have developed that model, it should be also easy to also have that model account or be adjusted based on the temperature. Is this something that you thinking to do, or?
So yes and no. Yes, it should be possible. So we would definitely like to, for example, increase the transfer of information from, say, the paver out temperatures to the roller system. So it would be nice to be able to project a forward-looking temperature map for the roller driver to look at, so that they can analyze cold spots. Using that data in order to change the vibration amplitude or things like that, that's another step beyond. I think it makes sense that you should be able to do that. It's not something we have done yet, but I would be interested in looking at it if it's all possible.
Look forward to following your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question comes from Shupraja. Was HDS implemented by any ICT on subgrade or embankment lifts in the UK?
Yeah, at the moment, we've just, well, not at the moment, we've just concluded a project which had innovation funding from the English national regulator, looking at using the roller system for basically doing earthworks compaction monitoring. And it does work quite well. So you can use stiffness in this context because you don't have the temperature variable quite well to correlate against, say, plate bearing CBRs as well as densities. There is some issue with the measurement system because essentially using a roller to measure those variables. The roller actually measures 1.5 times the diameter of the roller drum in the same way as a plate bearing does. So what you find is you're normally capturing a lot of information below the actual lift that you're constructing. So it does correlate quite well, but I don't think enough research has been done to have like complete confidence in the system. There should be a report coming out from Cowie, who are the engineering consultants, as well as Arcadis, who did the technical assurance, which I'd be happy to share with the NRRA once it's been published. But we've really only just gone through the data collection process. I do know that they're using it a lot on HS2. HS2 is a high-speed rail line being built in the UK. And it's the largest infrastructure construction project in Europe, actually. And I know that all of the earthworks compaction requires the use of that continuous compaction control system. We're not involved with that directly, so I don't know how much information I could get from that. But sorry, that's a slightly convoluted answer. The answer is yes. And I'd like to provide some more information, but I might have to do that at a later date. I hope that answers that satisfactorily.
Understandable. Paul A has his hand up. So,
hi, Rory. Paul Angerhofer with MOBA here. Quick question about the specification that's coming out of Transport Scotland. You showed the specification saying that it must have equipment on the rollers, equipment on the paver. Are they planning on grading the quality using quantifiable information like thermal variability coming out of the paver or percentage of coverage on the rollers?
Yes, they are. So they've specified a minimum data capture percentage, but they are going to use the data, I think, in the way you're referring to basically put conditions on contractors that they have to achieve. So they're going to probably implement a similar thing to what is done by some of the DOTs, particularly with thermal segregation. So there's going to be a threshold above which they have to achieve proper thermal segregation. With compaction, I think that remains to be seen, because there's going to be a lot more data than is currently captured. And I instinctively imagine that they're going to try and produce a specification requirement that's more consistent with current requirements. So it's likely that you might have to have, say, an average number of passes recorded per load of material, and then that correlated percentage air voids. But they might be looking at using the mapping of the roller systems to produce a threshold in the same way as you could do for thermal segregation. I don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, but I know for sure that they will be putting in those type of specifications, definitely. I just can't say exactly what they'll be just yet.
Okay, thanks.
No worries.
So Praja did say that your answer did help, and thanks so much. So we have a couple more questions. Let me scroll here. Stephen says, have you attempted to use temperature to better correlate stiffness to density?
No, we haven't really. I think we basically, the general consensus in the UK, and this is from people who are much smarter than I am, is that it is too complicated basically to use as a reliable measurement. I know that some of the plant manufacturers, so Bomag in particular, Wirtgen with the HAM systems, they've been looking at it for quite a while, and they don't seem to have produced anything which is satisfactory. I saw the results of some research which was done by a body set up by Highways England, which is to do with the automation of construction plant. And they basically decided that they weren't going to be using stiffness as a variable because of the difficulty in accounting for temperature. So we've kind of taken the work done by other people and sort of said, well, we're going to try and come up with something different, because we also have our own reservations about whether you can reliably use stiffness. So we haven't really gone and done the research ourselves in detail, because we've kind of assumed that it wouldn't work from the start, and we've taken our lead from other people. But if you know of any information of somebody doing it elsewhere, I'd be very interested to learn about it.
Okay, and then the last question that I see here in the chat is from Thomas. Just wondering how many bituminous contractors you have in the UK and how they have received the new specification and technology requirements.
We work with every major contractor in the UK, and a fair few of the little ones. I mean, the UK market obviously is a lot smaller than the US market. There's probably 6 main ones who cover the UK. We work with all of those, and there's, I don't know, any number of maybe sort of 50 to 80 sort of smaller ones in varying different degrees of size. There's been a sort of slow process of acceptance of the requirement or the need to get on board with using technology in the UK. We've been doing this now for about 10 years or so, and at the beginning there was a fair amount of reticence from contractors to use this technology because I suppose fairly they assumed that it was going to show a lot more information about how the roads were being built and therefore give their clients more opportunity to take issue with what they've been doing. So it's been a bit of a slow process of getting them to come round to seeing the potential opportunities for process improvement. And I have to say that the regulators have been quite good in the UK in not using it as a stick to beat people over the head with. So everyone's kind of come on the journey at the same time, which I think has really helped when the specifications have come out, a pretty broad acceptance. As I said, we're working with 3 contractors in Scotland, Aggregate Industries, Tarmac, which is owned by CRH, and Breedon, and there's been no issue with those contractors. We work with them in England as well, actually. So I think it's been handled quite well, and I think for anybody who doesn't currently use this technology and is considering asking their contractors to do so, it's probably best conducted as a collaborative approach, because that certainly helps reduce perceptions or any negative perceptions that there are. That's certainly been our experience, I think, in the UK.
Thanks, Rory. Tom Raven here from Minnesota. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks very much.
If anyone else has any other questions or comments, feel free to just unmute yourselves and ask. 'Cause that's all the questions from the chat. Hearing none, I think we will just wrap it up for today. And if you have a desire to get a copy of Rory's presentation, I'm sure he'd be happy to provide that. Otherwise, we will have the recording up here probably by the end of the week, so you can refer back to that. Yep, Rory just added his email into the chat, so you can grab that if you'd like. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope everyone stays cool wherever they are around the world, and we hope to see you next month.
Thank you all very much for your time.